The dust-laden wind carried the scent of desperation as Abigail Lawson stared at the weathered well, her hands trembling not from the strain of the rope, but from the fever that had plagued her for 3 days. The summer of 1876 in Fargo, Dakota Territory, had been unforgiving, with drought claiming crops and disease claiming lives. Her father's homestead sat isolated on the prairie's edge, and with him bedridden and her mother tending to him, the chore of fetching water had fallen to her weakened frame. The wooden bucket seemed to weigh as much as a boulder as she attempted to haul it up from the depths of the well. Her vision blurred, spots dancing before her eyes as she struggled against both gravity and her own failing strength. The rope slipped through her raw palms, and she let out a frustrated sob, collapsing to her knees beside the stone well. "You'll hurt yourself trying to do that," a deep voice called from behind her. Abigail turned, squinting against the blazing afternoon sun to make out the tall figure approaching on horseback. The stranger dismounted with practiced ease, his spurs jingling musically as his boots hit the ground. He moved with the confident gait of a man who knew the land and its hardships intimately. "I can manage," she lied, attempting to stand but finding her legs uncooperative. The man approached, and as he drew closer, she could see his features clearly. Dust clung to his tanned face, and a week's worth of stubble darkened his jaw. His eyes, though they were startlingly kind, blue as the Montana sky her father always reminisced about. He couldn't have been more than 30, his broad shoulders carrying a worn leather vest over a faded blue shirt. "You're shaking like an aspen leaf," he observed, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with sun-bleached strands. "And you're pale as the moon. Are you sick, miss?" "Just a touch of something," she admitted reluctantly. "But we need water." "My father's ill and my mother," he nodded, understanding without requiring further explanation. "Then let me do the work," he said simply, stepping forward to take the rope from her trembling hands. "I'm Mitchell Keane. Most folks call me Mitch." His capable hands made short work of what she had struggled with, hauling the heavy bucket up with seemingly effortless strength. Water sloshed over the sides as he set it down carefully on the stone edge of the well. "I'm Abigail Lawson," she offered, feeling somehow both relieved and embarrassed by his assistance. "We've got the homestead just over that rise." "I know it," he said, filling a dipper from the bucket and offering it to her first. "I've been riding fence for the Triple Bar Ranch." "Your father's land borders the northern pasture." The cool water was heaven against her parched throat. "Thank you, Mr. Keane, Mitch," he corrected gently. "Let me carry this for you, and then, if you don't mind, I'd like to check on your father. I've some knowledge of illnesses, picked up a few things during the war." Abigail hesitated. Strangers weren't to be trusted easily out here where the law was distant and danger constant. But there was something in Mitchell Keane's steady gaze that spoke of reliability, of the kind of honor that the harsh prairie demanded of those who survived it. "We'd be grateful," she finally said, leading the way toward the simple clapboard house that her father had built with his own hands 6 years prior, when the promise of free land under the Homestead Act had lured them west from Pennsylvania. As they walked, Abigail felt her strength waning further, the fever making her steps unsteady. Mitchell noticed immediately, setting down the water bucket and catching her elbow just as she swayed. "Easy now," he murmured, his calloused hand firm but gentle on her arm. "Seems to me there's more than one patient in this household." "I'm fine," she insisted, the world tilting precariously around her. The last thing Abigail remembered before darkness claimed her was the surprising gentleness with which the weathered cowboy swept her up, cradling her against his chest, as though she were made of porcelain rather than the sturdy frontier stock she'd always prided herself on being. When consciousness returned, Abigail found herself in her own narrow bed, a cool cloth pressed to her forehead. The quality of light filtering through the uneven glass of her window suggested late afternoon. She tried to sit up, only to find her mother's hand gently restraining her. "Rest, Abby," Martha Lawson whispered, her face lined with worry but no longer carrying the look of frantic desperation it had worn for days. "You've been burning with fever." "Father," Abigail croaked, her throat dry. "His fever broke an hour ago," Martha said, relief evident in her voice. "That cowboy, he knew just what to do. Made a poultice of some herbs he gathered, and your father's breathing easier than he has in days." Abigail turned her head to see Mitchell Keane sitting at their rough-hewn table, grinding something in her mother's mortar. His hat rested on the bench beside him, and he'd rolled up his sleeves, revealing sinewy forearms browned by the sun. He looked up, as if sensing her gaze, and a small smile touched his lips. "Welcome back," he said, rising to bring a cup of something steaming to her bedside. "This is willow bark tea. Tastes awful, but it'll help with the fever." She grimaced at the bitter liquid but swallowed it dutifully. "Where did you learn about medicines?" A shadow crossed his face. "My mother was Cherokee. She taught me about healing plants before she died." "Then in the war, there weren't always doctors available." He shrugged, as if dismissing the memories. "Basic survival out here, knowing what the land can provide." Over the next 3 days, Mitchell Keane became the lifeline for the Lawson homestead. He fetched water, tended to their neglected livestock, and kept both Abigail and her father, Samuel, supplied with the herbal remedies that gradually restored their strength. He slept in their barn, refusing Martha's offer of the house, saying only that he'd known far worse accommodations. On the 4th morning, Abigail woke feeling truly herself again. She dressed quietly, not wanting to disturb her still sleeping parents, and stepped outside into the pearly dawn light. She found Mitchell at the corral, already mucking out the small stable where they kept their 2 workhorses and single milk cow. "You should be resting," he admonished when he spotted her, leaning the pitchfork against the fence. "I've rested enough," she replied, plaiting her long auburn hair and securing it at the nape of her neck. "And you've done far more than any stranger could be expected to." He chuckled, a rich sound that she realized she'd heard more frequently as the days passed, and he grew more comfortable in their presence. "Neighbors help neighbors out here. That's how it works." "Are you our neighbor, then?" she asked, curiosity overcoming propriety. "You mentioned the triple bar, but Mother says you're not one of old Mr. Barton's regular hands." Mitchell wiped his hands on a rag and leaned against the fence post. "I drift," he admitted. "Take work where I find it." Spent some years up in Montana Territory after the war, did some time with a cattle outfit in Texas. He looked out over the rolling prairie, tinged gold in the early light. "But I've been thinking about putting down roots." Something in his tone made Abigail's heart beat a little faster, though she told herself it was merely the lingering effects of her illness. "Well, we're grateful for whatever Providence brought you our way," she said formally, suddenly conscious of being alone with him in the quiet dawn. "Will you stay for breakfast at least? It's the least we can offer." His smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. "I'd like that, Miss Lawson." "Abigail," she corrected, mirroring his earlier insistence on familiarity, "or Abby as my parents call me." "Abigail suits you better," he said thoughtfully. "There's a strength in it." She felt heat rise to her cheeks that had nothing to do with fever. "I should see to the chickens," she murmured, turning away before he could see her blush. As she gathered eggs, Abigail pondered the strange turn of events that had brought Mitchell Keane into their lives. Had it truly been only 4 days since he'd found her struggling at the well? It seemed both longer and shorter somehow, as though time had bent around his arrival. Her father was up and dressed when she returned to the house, sitting at the table while her mother fried salt pork in their cast-iron skillet. Samuel Lawson was a big man, though illness had hollowed his cheeks and dimmed the usual vigor in his gray eyes. Still, when he looked at Mitchell entering behind Abigail, there was unmistakable gratitude in his expression. "Mr. Keane," he said, extending a hand that no longer trembled with fever. "My wife tells me we owe you our lives." Mitchell clasped the offered hand briefly. "Nothing of the sort, sir. Just happened along at the right time." "Nevertheless," Samuel insisted, "we're in your debt, and I insist on offering you payment for your help." Mitchell shook his head firmly. "I won't take money for doing what any decent man would do." "Then at least stay on for a while," Martha suggested, placing a platter of fried potatoes on the table. "Samuel needs to regain his strength before he can manage the farm work again, and we could use the help with planting season upon us." Mitchell glanced at Abigail, something unreadable in his expression. "If you're sure I wouldn't be imposing, I could stay a week or two. My arrangement with the triple bar was just temporary anyway." "It's settled then," Samuel declared with more energy than he'd shown in days. "We'll convert the old storage room for you. Can't have you sleeping in the barn like an animal when you've done so much for us." And so Mitchell Keane became part of the rhythm of the Lawson homestead. He rose before dawn each day, working alongside Abigail to complete the morning chores before breakfast. As Samuel gradually regained his strength, Mitchell taught him techniques for conserving energy while working lessons learned, he said, from years of range work where a man had to pace himself through the long days. Abigail found herself watching Mitchell when he thought no one was looking. There was an economy to his movements, a quiet competence that spoke of years of hard-won experience. Unlike many of the men she'd encountered in Fargo, he never boasted or puffed himself up with exaggerated stories. When he spoke of his past, which was rarely, it was with a matter-of-factness that suggested he saw little exceptional in his own history. One evening, as twilight gathered and the household chores were done, Abigail found Mitchell sitting on the rough-hewn bench outside the house, whittling a piece of pine wood with a small knife. Curious, she sat beside him, leaving a proper distance between them. "What are you making?" she asked, watching the careful movements of his hands. He held up the small carving, a bird taking flight, wings outspread, every feather intricately detailed. "Just keeping my hands busy," he said modestly. "My mother taught me this too, said idle hands were the devil's workshop." "It's beautiful," Abigail said honestly, reaching out to trace a finger along the wooden wing. He watched her face rather than her hand. "You remind me of a bird sometimes," he said quietly, "especially when you're moving around the kitchen or garden. Quick and graceful, like you might take flight at any moment." His words stirred something in her chest, a flutter of wings not unlike the wooden bird he'd created. She dropped her gaze, suddenly self-conscious. "I'm hardly graceful," she demurred. "Just a farmer's daughter who's never been farther than 50 miles from where she was born." "Distance traveled doesn't define a person," he said, resuming his carving. "I've met men who have crossed oceans but never looked beyond themselves. And others who have never left their home county but understand the whole world." "And which are you?" she asked boldly, surprising herself with the question. His knife paused and he looked out over the darkening prairie. "Neither, I suppose. I've seen enough to know how little I understand, and traveled enough to know there's always somewhere new beyond the horizon." "You ever wish to settle?" The question escaped before she could consider its implications. Mitchell was silent for so long that Abigail feared she'd offended him. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and thoughtful. "When I was younger, after the war, all I wanted was movement. Staying in one place felt like suffocating. He turned the carving in his hands, examining it from different angles. But lately, I've been wondering what it might be like to build something that lasts, to plant trees whose shade I might actually sit under someday. There was a vulnerability in his admission that touched Abigail deeply. Before she could respond, her father's voice called from inside, asking for assistance with something, and the moment passed. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Abigail found sleep elusive. Mitchell Keane was unlike any man she'd ever known. The few young men in Fargo who'd shown interest in her had been either the rough, uncultured sort who saw her as little more than potential free labor on their homesteads, or the calculating sons of merchants who measured her worth by her father's modest holdings. Mitchell looked at her as though truly seeing her not as a possession or a convenience, but as a person of value and substance. It was as disorienting as it was thrilling. 2 weeks stretched into 3, and then a month. Mitchell integrated so seamlessly into their household that it became difficult for Abigail to remember what life had been like before his arrival. He repaired the leaking roof, reinforced the sagging barn door, and helped Samuel implement more efficient farming methods he'd observed in his travels. In the evenings, he would sometimes share stories of the places he'd been describing: the towering redwoods of California, the stark beauty of the Arizona desert, or the teeming streets of New Orleans. Abigail listened, enthralled, imagining these far-off places she'd likely never see. "You tell it so vividly," she said one night after he described the Grand Canyon. "It's almost like being there." He smiled, the flickering lamplight casting shadows across his features. "Maybe someday you will see it yourself. The world is changing, Abigail. The railroad pushes farther west every year. Places that once took months to reach can now be visited in days. I can't imagine ever leaving here," she said, glancing at her parents who sat together by the fire, her father reading aloud from their well-worn Bible while her mother mended a shirt. "This is home." "Home can be many places," Mitchell said softly, his eyes never leaving her face. "Or a person rather than a place." Before Abigail could decipher his meaning, a pounding at the door shattered the peaceful evening. Samuel set aside his Bible and rose to answer it, his strength nearly fully restored after weeks of proper rest and nourishment. The visitor was Elias Jenkins, their nearest neighbor whose homestead lay 3 miles east. His face was ashen, his clothing disheveled. "Samuel," he gasped. "There's trouble. Barton's men are burning out the Phillips place, says they're on his grazing land." Samuel's expression hardened. "The Phillips filed legal claim to that land last spring. I was witness to the filing myself." "Barton don't care about papers," Elias spat. "Says he was running cattle there before any homesteader showed up, and that gives him rights. They've already destroyed the crops and threatened worse if Phillips doesn't clear out by morning." Abigail watched as Mitchell rose from his chair, his relaxed demeanor replaced by alertness. "Barton's foreman," he said. "Is it still Decker?" Elias nodded grimly. "Mean as a rattlesnake and twice as dangerous. Has 3 new hands with him I don't recognize. Hard-looking men." Mitchell's jaw tightened. "I know Decker. Worked with him briefly at the Triple Bar before I realized what kind of man he was. He's the type who mistakes cruelty for strength." "We need to help the Phillips family," Samuel declared. "Martha, pack some food. They may need somewhere to stay if their home is damaged." "I'm coming with you," Mitchell stated, not as a request but as a fact. He strapped on a gun belt that Abigail had never seen him wear before, checking the revolver with practiced hands before replacing it in the holster. "And me," Abigail insisted, already reaching for her shawl. "No," all 3 men said in unison, but it was Mitchell who continued. "This could turn ugly, Abigail. These men won't hesitate to hurt anyone who stands in their way." His eyes held hers, intense with concern. "Please stay here with your mother. We may bring the Phillips back with us, and they'll need comforting." She wanted to argue but saw the determination in his face. Instead, she nodded reluctantly and helped her mother gather provisions while the men saddled horses. As Mitchell mounted up, he leaned down from the saddle. "Abigail," he said quietly, "if we're not back by dawn, take your mother and ride to town. Find Sheriff Taggart and tell him what's happened." The gravity of his words sent a chill through her. "You'll come back," she said, trying to make it sound like certainty rather than desperate hope. He reached down and took her hand, just for a moment. "I'll do my best to make sure of it." The three men rode off into the darkness, leaving Abigail and Martha to wait in tense silence. They prepared the house for possible guests, making up pallets on the floor and heating water for tea and washing. "He cares for you," Martha said suddenly as they worked. Abigail didn't pretend to misunderstand. "He's a kind man. He cares for everyone." Martha gave her daughter a knowing look. "Not the way he cares for you, Abby. I've seen how he watches you when you're not looking, like you're water in the desert." Heat flooded Abigail's cheeks. "Mother, please, he's just being courteous." "A man doesn't look at courtesy the way he looks at you," Martha said gently. "And I've noticed you watch him too when you think no one will see." Abigail busied herself with arranging blankets, unable to meet her mother's eyes. "Even if that were true," she said carefully, "he's made it clear he doesn't stay in one place. He's a drifter by his own admission." "People change when they find the right reason," Martha said, patting her daughter's hand. "Your father was determined to stay in Pennsylvania his whole life until he met me and my restless spirit." Before Abigail could respond, the distant sound of hoofbeats interrupted their conversation. She rushed to the window, straining to see in the darkness. Relief flooded her as she recognized 3 riders approaching, followed by a wagon. She flung open the door as they drew near, holding up a lantern. Samuel dismounted first, helping a woman down from the wagon while Elias assisted a man with a bloodied bandage around his head. 3 small children huddled in the back of the wagon, wide-eyed with fear. Mitchell was the last to dismount, and even in the dim light, Abigail could see that his shirt was torn and a darkening bruise marred his left cheekbone. "Sarah Phillips, Robert," Samuel introduced the couple as they entered the house, "and their children, Thomas, Mary, and little Joseph." Martha immediately took charge, settling the children by the fire with cups of warm milk while Abigail helped Sarah to a chair. The woman was visibly trembling, her eyes hollow with shock. "They burned our crops," she said, her voice barely audible. "Everything we planted. Said we'd be next if we didn't leave. Decker caught Robert alone in the field," Samuel explained grimly. "Roughed him up pretty badly before we got there." Abigail looked to Mitchell, who had remained near the door, his expression unreadable. "What happened when you arrived?" "Your father tried reasoning with them," Mitchell said, a note of admiration in his voice. "Reminded them of the legal claim. When that didn't work." He trailed off, touching his bruised face unconsciously. Mitchell stood up to Decker, Samuel finished. "Man to man. Told him if he had a quarrel, it should be with men who could fight back, not women and children." Decker didn't take kindly to that, Elias added. "Especially when he recognized Mitchell from the Triple Bar. Called him a traitor for siding with dirt farmers against cattlemen." "There was a fight," Mitchell admitted. "But we made it clear that the Phillips aren't standing alone, that all the homesteaders in this area will band together if Barton's men try anything further." "Decker backed down for now," Samuel said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe the trouble was over. "But he promised to bring the matter to Barton himself." As the Phillips family was settled for the night, Abigail noticed Mitchell slip outside. She followed, finding him at the water pump, washing blood whose she couldn't tell from his hands. She wordlessly offered him a clean cloth. "Thank you," he said, accepting it. In the moonlight, his bruised face looked even more severe. "Does it hurt badly?" she asked, resisting the urge to reach up and touch the injury. He shrugged. "I've had worse." "That doesn't answer my question," she pressed gently. A small smile touched his lips despite the grim circumstances. "Yes, it hurts, but it was worth it." "You could have been killed," she said, the reality of that possibility hitting her fully for the first time. The thought left her feeling hollow inside. "So could Robert Phillips," Mitchell countered. "Or his family if we hadn't shown up when we did. Decker's not the type to make idle threats." Abigail wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly chilled despite the mild night. "What happens now?" Mitchell leaned against the pump, looking up at the star-strewn sky. "Barton will either rein Decker in or he'll support him. If it's the latter, there will be more trouble. The cattlemen have been losing ground to homesteaders for years, and some of them are desperate to hold onto what they see as their territory." "And where do you stand in all this?" she asked, the question that had been nagging at her since he'd first mentioned working for the Triple Bar. "You've been a cowboy yourself." His eyes found hers in the darkness. "I stand where I've always stood with people who work honestly and treat others fairly. Being a cowboy doesn't mean bullying those weaker than yourself. Most cowhands I've known are decent men just trying to make a living, same as farmers." Relief flooded through her, though she hadn't realized until that moment how much his answer mattered to her. "I'm glad you were here tonight," she said softly. "Not just for the Phillips, but I'm just glad you were here." Something shifted in Mitchell's expression, a softening around his eyes. He took a step toward her, closing the distance between them. "Abigail," he began, his voice low and uncertain in a way she'd never heard before. Mitchell, Abigail." Samuel's voice called from the house. "Come in now, we need to discuss plans for tomorrow." The moment shattered. Mitchell stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should go in." Abigail nodded, but as they walked back to the house, she felt the weight of unspoken words hanging between them. The next week passed in tense anticipation. Robert Phillips recovered from his beating, but the family remained with the Lawsons, too afraid to return to their homestead. Samuel and Elias rode into Fargo to speak with Sheriff Taggart, who promised to investigate but seemed reluctant to challenge Barton, one of the territory's wealthiest men. Mitchell spent long hours riding the perimeter of the Lawson property, watching for any sign of Decker or his men. Each night, he would return dusty and tired but would insist on taking the first watch while the others slept. On the 8th day after the confrontation, Abigail rose before dawn to find Mitchell already awake, saddling his horse in the dim light of early morning. "Where are you going?" she asked, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders against the cool air. He turned, not seeming surprised to see her. "To the Triple Bar. It's time I spoke with Barton directly." Alarm shot through her. "That's too dangerous. What if Decker is there?" "I'm counting on it," Mitchell said grimly. "This situation can't continue, Abigail. The Phillips can't live as refugees forever, and your family shouldn't have to support two households indefinitely. At least take Father or Elias with you," she pleaded. He shook his head. "Barton respects straight talk man to man, and he knows me from before. I worked for him briefly when I first came to the territory." "What will you say to him?" she asked, knowing she couldn't dissuade him. "The truth. That forcing homesteaders off legal claims will only lead to more violence, and eventually the territorial authorities will have to step in." He finished cinching the saddle and turned to face her fully. "Barton's not a fool. He knows the days of open range are ending." He just needs to be reminded that adaptation is better than futile resistance. Abigail took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. "Promise me you'll be careful." His expression softened as he looked down at her worried face. "I promise." He hesitated, then reached out to touch her cheek briefly, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I have too much to come back for." Before she could respond, he mounted and rode off, leaving her standing in the yard with her hand pressed to her cheek where his touch still lingered. The day stretched endlessly, each hour dragging by as Abigail tried to keep busy with household tasks. By mid-afternoon, even her mother commented on her distraction. "He'll be all right, Abby," Martha said as they worked together kneading bread dough. "Mitchell Keane strikes me as a man who knows how to handle himself." "I know," Abigail said, punching the dough with perhaps more force than necessary. "I just wish he hadn't gone alone." "Some things a man needs to do by himself," Martha observed, "especially when he's trying to prove something." Abigail looked up sharply. "Prove what?" "To whom?" Martha smiled knowingly. "To himself, perhaps, or to the man he hopes to be worthy of something or someone he wants." Before Abigail could demand clarification, Samuel burst through the door, rifle in hand. "Riders coming," he announced tersely. "At least 5 of them." Abigail's heart lurched. She rushed to the window, straining to see the approaching horsemen. Relief flooded through her as she recognized Mitchell's tall figure at the head of the group. "It's Mitchell," she reported, "and I think that's Mr. Barton with him." Indeed, as the riders drew closer, she could make out the portly figure of Edmund Barton, owner of the Triple Bar and one of the territory's first settlers. Behind them rode 3 more men, including a thin, hawk-faced individual she guessed must be Decker. Samuel stepped onto the porch as the riders approached, his rifle not quite pointed at them but ready nonetheless. Mitchell dismounted first, giving Samuel a reassuring nod. "Mr. Lawson," he said formally, "Mr. Barton has come to speak with you and Robert Phillips if he's willing." Barton dismounted with the help of one of his men, his movements hampered by his considerable girth. Despite his size, there was an undeniable authority in his bearing. "Lawson," he greeted gruffly, "been a while." "Barton," Samuel acknowledged coolly, "what brings you to my property?" "A proposition," Barton said, removing his hat to wipe his brow, "and a chance to settle things peacefully. Your man Keane here made some persuasive arguments." Mitchell stood slightly apart, his stance alert but relaxed. Abigail noticed that Decker remained mounted, his expression sullen as he glared at Mitchell. Robert Phillips emerged from the house, standing tall despite the lingering evidence of his beating. "What kind of proposition?" he asked warily. "Let's discuss it civilized-like," Barton suggested. "Inside, if your wife will permit it." After a moment's hesitation, Samuel nodded and led the way into the house. Decker and one of the other men remained outside with the horses, while Barton and his third companion followed Samuel inside. Mitchell was the last to enter, and as he passed Abigail in the doorway, he gave her a small, reassuring smile. "It's all right," he murmured. "Trust me." The meeting lasted over an hour. Martha served coffee while Abigail kept the Phillips children occupied in the back room, straining to hear snippets of the men's conversation. When they finally emerged, there was a cautious optimism on Robert Phillips' face that hadn't been there before. "We've reached an agreement," Samuel announced to the women. "Barton has offered to purchase the southern portion of the Phillips claim, the part nearest his grazing land, at a fair price. Robert and Sarah will retain the northern section, including their house site. And Barton has agreed to help rebuild what was destroyed," Mitchell added, looking directly at Abigail with something like pride in his eyes. "As a gesture of goodwill." "It's not perfect," Robert admitted, "but it gives us enough capital to properly develop what we keep and ends the feud before anyone else gets hurt. Barton cleared his throat. I also want to make it clear that Decker acted without my knowledge or approval in burning crops. He fixed his gaze on Sarah Phillips. Madam, I've been many things in my life, not all of them honorable, but I don't make war on women and children. You have my word it won't happen again. After Barton and his men departed, with Decker notably silent throughout the leave-taking, the mood in the Lawson household was one of cautious relief. The Phillips family decided to stay one more night before returning to their homestead the following day to begin repairs. As evening fell, Abigail found Mitchell at his usual spot on the bench outside, whittling again. This time she saw he was carving a small horse. "How did you do it?" she asked, sitting beside him. "Convince Barton, I mean." Mitchell's hands continued their careful work as he spoke. "I reminded him that the territory is changing. The railroad's coming, and with it, more settlers. Fighting a losing battle against homesteaders would only cost him money and reputation in the long run." He glanced at her. "Barton's many things, but he's a businessman first. He understands pragmatism. And Decker, he didn't seem happy with the arrangement." A shadow crossed Mitchell's face. "Decker won't be a problem anymore. Part of my discussion with Barton was about his foreman's excessive methods. Barton agreed that some changes in personnel might be necessary." Abigail studied his profile in the fading light. "You took a tremendous risk today." He set aside his carving and turned to face her fully. "Some things are worth the risk, Abigail." Something in his tone made her heart quicken. "Mitchell, I've been thinking," he interrupted gently, "about what I said to you that first day, about putting down roots." She held her breath, afraid to hope for what his words might mean. "The thing is," he continued, his voice growing more confident, "I've never felt settled anywhere before. Not since before the war, anyway. But these past weeks, working this land with your family, defending it." He paused, searching for words. "It's the first time in years I haven't felt the itch to move on." "Is that because of the land?" she asked softly, needing to be certain of his meaning. His eyes met hers, warm and unwavering. "It's because of you, Abigail. I think maybe I was always looking for something without knowing what it was. And then I found you struggling with that water bucket, too proud to admit you needed help, and suddenly everything made sense." Joy bloomed in her chest, but caution tempered it. "How can you be sure? You've only known me a short time." "I've known you long enough to see your strength, your kindness, your devotion to your family, long enough to know that when I imagine a future now, you're always part of it." He reached for her hand, his touch sending warmth through her. "I'm not asking for promises yet, just a chance to stay, to see if what I feel, what I hope you might feel too, can grow into something lasting." Abigail looked down at their joined hands, his sun-browned and calloused, hers smaller but no less work-hardened. "I've never met anyone like you," she admitted. "When you rode off this morning, all I could think was how empty this place would seem if you didn't return." A smile spread across his face, transforming his weathered features. "Is that a yes to me staying?" She returned his smile, feeling suddenly shy but certain. "Yes, though you should probably speak with my father as well." "I already have," he confessed. "This morning before I left. I wanted his blessing to court you properly, if you were willing." "And what did he say?" she asked, though she could guess from her father's lack of surprise at Mitchell's return. "He said I'd be a fool not to see what was right in front of me, and an even bigger fool to let you slip away." Mitchell's thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "He also said that if I ever hurt you, he'd hunt me to the ends of the earth." Abigail laughed, the sound bright in the gathering dusk. "That certainly sounds like father." Mitchell's expression grew serious again. "I can't promise wealth or an easy life, Abigail, but I can promise to work hard, to be faithful, and to never take for granted the gift of your affection." "I don't need wealth or ease," she said simply. "Just honesty and partnership. The rest we can build together." As darkness settled around them, Mitchell reached into his pocket and pulled out the small wooden horse he'd been carving. He placed it in her palm, closing her fingers around it. "The first gift of many," he said softly. "A reminder that sometimes help comes when you least expect it, but need it most." Abigail's eyes filled with tears as she remembered their first meeting at the well. "I'm glad I was too weak to lift that bucket," she whispered. Mitchell's hand gently cupped her cheek. "And I'm glad I was there to do the work," he replied, leaning forward to place a gentle kiss on her forehead, a promise of the future they would build together. The summer of 1876 gave way to autumn, and as the harvest was brought in, Mitchell Keane became an indispensable part of the Lawson homestead. Samuel, recognizing both Mitchell's worth as a worker and his genuine feelings for Abigail, offered him a partnership in the farm, an arrangement that would eventually lead to Mitchell inheriting a portion of the land. For his part, Mitchell proved to be as adept at farming as he had been at range work, applying the diverse knowledge he'd gathered in his years of wandering to improve the Lawsons' methods and yields. With the money he'd saved from his various jobs, he purchased additional acreage adjacent to the Lawson property, expanding their holdings and securing their future. As winter settled over the Dakota Territory, bringing with it howling blizzards and temperatures that froze the breath in one's lungs, the Lawson household found itself cozier and more content than ever before. In the evenings, while Samuel and Martha read by the fire, Mitchell would teach Abigail the art of carving, his large hands guiding her smaller ones as she learned to coax shapes from simple blocks of wood. "You need to feel the grain," he explained one night, his arms around her as he helped her make a cut. "The wood will tell you where it wants to go." "Like life," she mused, leaning back against his chest. "Sometimes we think we're carving our own path, only to discover we've been following a pattern that was there all along." He pressed a kiss to the top of her head. "Spoken like a true philosopher, and here I thought I was just teaching you to whittle." Their courtship progressed with the deliberate pace common to frontier life, where practicality and certainty were valued over haste. By Christmas, Mitchell had built a small addition to the Lawson home, a room of his own that offered him more privacy than the converted storage space, while still respecting the proprieties of his relationship with Abigail. On Christmas Eve, as the family exchanged modest gifts around a pine tree decorated with paper chains and dried berries, Mitchell presented Abigail with a carved jewelry box, its lid inlaid with a perfect miniature of the Lawson homestead. "It's beautiful," she breathed, tracing the tiny details with her fingertip. "Open it," he urged, an unusual nervousness in his voice. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft cloth, lay a simple gold band. Abigail's eyes widened as she looked up at Mitchell, who had moved to kneel before her. "Abigail Lawson," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "These past months have been the happiest of my life. I came to Dakota Territory looking for work, but I found a home instead, and the woman I want to share that home with for the rest of my days." He took her hand in his. "Will you marry me?" "Yes," she answered without hesitation, joy making her voice tremble. "Yes, Mitchell Keane, I will marry you." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Samuel cleared his throat emotionally. "Welcome to the family, son," he said, extending his hand to Mitchell. "Though I reckon you've been part of it for some time already." Martha wiped tears from her eyes. "We'll have the wedding in the spring," she declared, "when the prairie flowers bloom." It's good luck to start a marriage when the earth itself is renewing. The winter months passed in a flurry of preparation. Abigail and Martha worked on her wedding dress, fashioned from fabric ordered specially from St. Paul. Mitchell, with Samuel's help, began construction on a small house on his newly acquired land, just a quarter-mile from the main Lawson homestead, close enough for daily contact, but offering the privacy the newlyweds would need. By April, when the first Pasqua flowers pushed through the last of the snow, the new house stood complete, a modest but sturdy two-room structure with a stone fireplace and real glass windows, a luxury Mitchell had insisted upon despite the expense. "I want you to have light," he explained when Abigail expressed concern about the cost. "To see your smile clearly every morning, and to watch the sunset together every evening without squinting through oiled paper." The wedding took place on the first truly warm day of May 1877. The entire community gathered on the Lawson property, homesteaders and ranchers alike, their usual differences set aside for the celebration. Even Edmund Barton attended, his wedding gift a fine Morgan horse that made Mitchell shake his head in amazement. "Never thought I'd see the day when cattlemen and sodbusters broke bread together so easily," Robert Phillips remarked to Mitchell during the festivities. Mitchell, unable to take his eyes off his bride as she danced with her father, smiled contentedly. "People can surprise you when given the chance. Sometimes all it takes is finding common ground." As the celebration wound down and the newlyweds prepared to walk to their new home, Abigail found herself unexpectedly emotional. She had lived her entire life in her parents' house, and though her new home was just a short distance away, the symbolic leave-taking struck her forcefully. Martha, understanding without words as mothers often do, embraced her daughter tightly. "It's not goodbye," she whispered. "Just a new chapter." "I know," Abigail said, wiping away tears. "I'm being foolish." "Not foolish," Mitchell said, taking her hand. "Just loving. It's one of the things I adore about you." As they walked hand in hand toward their new home in the gathering dusk, Abigail felt a profound sense of rightness settle over her. The path ahead was uncertain. Frontier life guaranteed hardship alongside joy, but she knew with bone-deep certainty that she had found her partner for the journey. "What are you thinking?" Mitchell asked as they approached the house, its new timber glowing golden in the sunset light. "That I'm grateful you happened by our well that day," she answered honestly. "That sometimes being too weak to lift a bucket can lead to the greatest strength of all." He stopped, turning to face her as the last rays of sunlight gilded his features. "Which is love," she said simply. "The kind that builds homes and futures and transforms drifters into settlers." Mitchell gathered her into his arms, his expression solemn with the weight of his feelings. "I promise you, Abigail Keane, that I will spend every day earning the gift you've given me. No matter what comes, drought or blizzard, feast or famine, we'll face it together." As he carried her across the threshold of their new home, Abigail knew that whatever challenges the frontier might bring, they would meet them with the same strength and determination that had brought them together, she with her quiet resilience, he with his willingness to shoulder the heaviest burdens when she faltered. And in the years that followed, through the birth of their children, the expansion of their farm, the gradual taming of the territory into statehood, that promise remained unbroken. Mitchell never forgot the lesson of their first meeting. That true strength lay not in standing alone, but in knowing when to offer help and when to accept it, in the sacred partnership of two souls committed to lightening each other's loads through all of life's seasons. The Dakota Territory would eventually become known for its harsh beauty and the resilience of those who tamed it. But for Mitchell and Abigail Keane, it would always be the place where a simple act of kindness at a well transformed two separate journeys into one shared path, proof that sometimes the heaviest burdens lead to the greatest blessings, if only there's someone willing to say, "Then let me do the work."